Your son needs a father, my newborn daughter needs milk. Giant rancher proposes to widow. In the dust of a frontier churchyard, a starving widow stumbles with her baby in her arms. The townsfolk whisper, unwilling to help, until a towering rancher steps forward. His voice thunders through the silence. Your son needs a father. My newborn daughter needs milk. Marry me today. What begins as a desperate bargain soon stirs the whole town. Whispers of debt, a ruthless cattle baron laying claim to her little boy, and a preacher calling the rancher's baby unclean, ignite a storm of hatred and fear. But hidden among old papers and broken promises lies a truth that could save or destroy them all. When kidnappers come in the night and justice turns against them, this fragile new family is pushed to the edge. Will this unlikely marriage of survival become a covenant of love and faith? Or will the widow lose everything she tried to protect? This channel isn't just about stories. It's about remembering what still holds value, empathy, truth, and the courage to care. The gray clouds hung low over the modest wooden church, casting a somber light through its simple glass windows. Inside, Ava Mayfield swayed in the third pew, her newborn daughter's soft whimpers cutting through the final verses of Amazing Grace. The baby's cries grew more insistent with each passing minute, and Ava could feel her own strength ebbing. Away like water through sand. 7-year-old, Ethan squirmed beside her, his small hands twisting the worn hem of his Sunday shirt. His dark eyes darted between his mother's pale face and his sister's reddening one. "Mama," he whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "Hush now," Ava murmured, though the words came out weaker than she intended. The room tilted strangely as the congregation rose for the final blessing. She clutched her daughter closer, fighting to stay upright as spots danced before her eyes. When the service ended, Ava stumbled out into the churchyard. The spring air felt thick and soupy, and her legs wouldn't quite do what she asked of them. The rough wooden steps of the church seemed to swim before her eyes. She made it 3 steps before her knees buckled. "Mama!" Ethan's frightened voice cut through the morning air as Ava sank to the ground, barely managing to keep her grip on the baby. The churchyard erupted in whispers, a tide of muttered words washing over her. Just like her husband, leaving nothing but debts, 2 children to feed now. But not a single hand reached out to help. Through the haze of her vision, Ava saw a shadow fall across her. Heavy boots crunched on the gravel, and suddenly, a large presence knelt beside her. She blinked, trying to focus on the broad-shouldered figure of Boaz McAllister. His own infant daughter was carefully bundled against his chest in a sling, dark eyes peering out from beneath a soft blanket. "Easy now," Boaz's deep voice rumbled as he steadied her with one strong hand. His touch was surprisingly gentle for such a large man. The whispers around them grew louder, more scandalized. As the solitary rancher helped the widow to her feet, Ava swayed again, and Boaz's arm came around her shoulders, supporting her weight. She could feel the curious stares of the congregation, boring into them. Everyone knew about Boaz McAllister's tragedy, how his Comanche wife had died bringing their daughter into the world just 2 months past. He'd barely been seen in town since, except for necessary supplies. Then Boaz did something that made the whole churchyard fall silent. He turned to face the gathered crowd, his voice carrying clear and strong across the morning air. "Your son needs a father," he said, looking directly at Ava. "My newborn daughter needs milk. Marry me, Ava. We'll keep both our children alive." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Ava felt Ethan press against her skirts, his small fingers clutching the worn fabric. Her baby daughter let out another hungry cry, and across from her, Boaz's little girl began to fuss as well. The sound of 2 hungry infants seemed to echo off the church walls. Ava's hands trembled as she looked up at Boaz. His face was serious, weathered by sun and grief, but his eyes held something steady and sure. This wasn't romance, it was survival, plain and simple. A chance for both their families to make it through this harsh spring. She nodded, the movement slight but clear. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely carrying across the sudden hush that had fallen over the churchyard. The sun broke through the clouds for a moment, casting long shadows across the packed earth. As evening approached, the town buzzed with talk of the morning's events. The scandal of such a hasty proposal, the shock of the solitary rancher choosing a widow with nothing to her name, the whispered concerns about his ties to the Comanche people. It all swirled through the streets like dust in the wind. But for Ava, watching her daughter finally nurse properly for the first time in days, the whispers seemed far away. Across the room, Boaz sat with both Ethan and his own daughter, his large hands gentle as he showed the boy how to hold his new sister. It wasn't the marriage she'd dreamed of as a girl, but perhaps it was the one they all needed to survive. The parsonage kitchen was warm and quiet as evening settled over the town. Ava sat at the worn wooden table, her trembling hands wrapped around a tin cup of weak broth. The preacher's wife had insisted on the sustenance, though Ava could barely manage small sips. "There now, dear," the older woman murmured, bustling about with nervous energy. "You need your strength." The door creaked open, and Boaz ducked his tall frame through the entrance. In his arms, his daughter was wrapped tightly in a soft blanket, her small face pinched with hunger. Without a word, he crossed to Ava and carefully placed the infant in her lap. The baby immediately began rooting, her tiny fists clenching and unclenching in desperate need. Ava's heart clenched at the sight. With gentle movements, she adjusted her clothing and guided the infant to nurse. The moment the baby latched, tears sprang to Ava's eyes. "She's so hungry," Ava whispered, watching the little one suckle frantically. Her own daughter dozed nearby in a borrowed cradle, finally content after nursing earlier. Boaz stood awkwardly to the side, his large hands hanging empty at his sides. His eyes were fixed on his daughter, relief evident in the slight softening of his weathered features. "Thank you," he said simply, his deep voice rough with emotion. The kitchen fell silent except for the baby's eager nursing and the soft tick of the mantel clock. Ava felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a heavy blanket. This child's life now depended on her, just as her own children's survival rested with Boaz. The connection between them was as real as iron chains, forged by desperate necessity. "Preacher." Ward cleared his throat from the doorway. "The situation requires swift action," he declared, his thin face stern. "For the sake of propriety and Christian decency, you must be married without delay. Tomorrow at dawn, before the morning service." Ava nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Boaz's quiet "yes, sir" seemed to echo in the small kitchen. Night passed in a blur of feeding both infants and trying to soothe Ethan's confused questions. When dawn broke, pale and cool, Ava found herself walking beside Boaz toward the church. Her son trudged behind them, kicking at stones with obvious displeasure, his small face set in a scowl. The early morning light cast long shadows through the church windows, as a handful of curious townspeople filled the first few pews. Ava's hands shook as she stood before Preacher Ward, the words of the ceremony washing over her like distant waves. "Do you, Boaz McAllister, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Boaz's voice was steady and sure. "And do you, Ava Mayfield, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Ava's "I do" came out as barely more than a whisper, but it carried in the hushed sanctuary. The simple gold band Boaz slipped onto her finger felt impossibly heavy. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of moving her meager belongings to Boaz's ranch house. As evening settled over the land, Ava stood in the sprawling kitchen, taking in the size of it. The house was well built but carried an air of loneliness, as if it had been waiting for something or someone to fill its empty spaces. Supper was a quiet affair. Ethan pushed his beans around his plate, casting suspicious glances at Boaz between bites. The two infants dozed in their cradles nearby, their tiny bellies finely full. The lamplight cast warm shadows on the walls, but did little to ease the awkward silence between them. Ava's eyes wandered over the large kitchen, noting the well-stocked pantry and the quality of the cookware. Just yesterday, she had been wondering how to feed her children their next meal. Now she sat at a solid oak table, in a house that spoke of careful planning and hard work. The sudden change in her circumstances felt almost dizzying. Boaz cleared his throat softly. "The bedroom upstairs is yours," he said, his eyes on his plate. "I've made up a bed in the back room for myself. Ethan can have the small room next to yours." Ethan's head snapped up at that, his dark eyes wide with surprise. It was the first hint of anything other than sullen resentment she'd seen from him all day. The lamp flickered as an evening breeze swept across the prairie and through the open window. Both children yawned, the long day finally catching up with them. Ava looked around at her new family, her suspicious son, her sleeping daughter, the quiet rancher who was now her husband, and his tiny daughter who depended on her for life itself. The weight of it all pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. Dawn crept over the prairie as Ava stirred from her new bed. The quilt still held unfamiliar scents, leather, sage, and something sweetly foreign she couldn't name. Both babies had nursed through the night, leaving her tired but determined to prove her worth. The floorboards creaked softly under her feet as she made her way downstairs. The hearth stood cold, but Ava knew her way around a fire. Soon, orange flames licked at fresh kindling, and she set about preparing breakfast. The kitchen felt enormous compared to her old one, every movement echoing in the quiet morning. She found cornmeal in the pantry and began stirring up a pot of mush, adding a pinch of salt. The familiar motion settled her nerves. Both infants slept peacefully in the cradle she'd brought down, their tiny faces peaceful in the growing light. Heavy footsteps on the stairs announced Boaz's arrival. He nodded to her, his expression unreadable as he took in the sight of breakfast preparations. "Much obliged," he said quietly, settling at the table with his Bible. Ethan appeared next, his hair tousled from sleep. He threw himself into a chair, far from Boaz, arms crossed tight over his chest. When Ava set a bowl of steaming mush before him, he picked at it without enthusiasm. "Good morning, son," Boaz tried, his deep voice gentle. Ethan's only response was to hunch further over his bowl, refusing to look up. The silence stretched uncomfortable and thick as morning fog. Boaz finished his portion and stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Ethan," he said, "would you like to see the barn? Got some horses need tending." The boy's head came up slightly, interest flickering across his face before he masked it with another scowl. Still, he pushed back from the table and followed Boaz. Outside, keeping a careful distance between them, Ava watched through the window as they crossed the yard. Boaz's tall frame moved with easy grace, while Ethan's smaller shadow trailed behind, kicking at clumps of grass. She turned her attention to exploring the house, both babies now fed and content in their cradle. The home was larger than she'd expected, with rooms that spoke of careful planning. What caught her eye most were the touches that clearly came from Boaz's late wife's people. Beautifully woven blankets draped over chairs, their patterns complex and meaningful in ways she didn't yet understand. Carved wooden figures stood on shelves, horses, buffalo, and birds rendered with loving detail. She ran her fingers over a blanket's soft weave, feeling like an intruder in this space that still held another woman's presence. Yet there was an undeniable warmth here, a sense of home that reached beyond her own uncertainty. In the barn, Boaz led Ethan to a gentle mare with a white star on her forehead. "This here's Star," he said, offering the boy a curry brush. "She needs a good grooming. Want to learn how?" Ethan took the brush without speaking, watching intently as Boaz demonstrated the proper strokes. The horse nickered softly, clearly enjoying the attention. Though the boy remained silent, his movements grew more confident as he copied Boaz's technique. The sun was setting when they gathered again for supper. Ava had found dried beans and salt pork, cooking them with cornbread in the Dutch oven. The familiar smells filled the kitchen as they sat down together. "Thank you," Ava said softly, meeting Boaz's eyes across the table, "for your kindness to us." Before Boaz could respond, Ethan's voice cut through the quiet. "You ain't my pa." The words fell hard as stones between them. Boaz set down his spoon, carefully regarding the boy with steady eyes. When he spoke, his voice held no anger, only gentle understanding. "No, son. Not yet, but I'll stand beside you, all the same." Ethan's lower lip trembled slightly before he clamped it still, staring down at his plate. The silence that followed felt different than before, still tense, but with a current of something else running beneath. Understanding, perhaps. Or possibility. Ava watched them both, her heart aching for her son's pain and warming at Boaz's patient response. Outside, a whippoorwill began its evening song, its notes floating through the open window like a prayer. The days settled into a gentle rhythm at the McAllister Ranch. Each morning, Ava rose before dawn to tend both infants, their small sounds mingling in the quiet house. Her daughter Sarah and Boaz's girl Ruth nursed well, growing stronger by the day. Boaz worked the cattle from sunrise to sunset, while Ethan watched from the fence, curiosity slowly overtaking his initial resistance. On Wednesday afternoon, Boaz rode in earlier than usual, his expression tight. "Word's come that Jed Prentice is in town," he said, helping Ava into the wagon. "We need supplies, but we'll make it quick." Ethan climbed up beside his mother, and Boaz clucked to the horses. The wagon wheels creaked along the dusty road toward town. Ava held both sleeping babies close, trying to quiet the flutter of anxiety in her chest at the mention of Prentice's name. The general store's bell tinkled as they entered. Mrs. Potter, the shopkeeper's wife, smiled warmly at the babies while Boaz gathered their needs: flour, coffee, sugar, and lamp oil. Ethan wandered toward the candy jars, pressing his nose against the glass. The door's bell rang again. Heavy boots thudded on wooden planks. Jed Prentice's shadow fell across the counter, his silver watch chain glinting in the afternoon light. He was a big man, though not as tall as Boaz, with cold eyes and a cruel twist to his mouth. "Well, if it ain't the widow Mayfield," he drawled, ignoring Boaz entirely. "Though I reckon that ain't your name no more, is it?" Ava pulled Ethan closer, her arm tight around his shoulders. "Mr. Prentice," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Seems to me there's still the matter of your late husband's markers." Prentice's voice carried through the store. "Man lost quite a pile at my tables before that fever took him." "Debt don't die with the debtor, ma'am." "I don't know what you're talking about," Ava said, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Prentice's smile widened. "Oh, I reckon you do. $500 plus interest. But seeing as how you're a woman alone—" "She ain't alone," Boaz interrupted, stepping between them. His voice was quiet but carried steel. "As I was saying," Prentice continued, "seeing as how cash might be hard to come by, I'm willing to take payment another way." His gaze settled on Ethan. "Boy's old enough to earn his keep. 3 years working my ranch ought to square things." "No," Ava gasped, clutching Ethan tighter. "You won't touch the boy," Boaz said, his massive frame blocking Prentice's view. "Whatever deck you claim exists, you'll deal with me now." Prentice's face darkened. "This ain't your concern, McAllister. This is between me and what's left of Jack Mayfield's family." "They're my family now," Boaz said simply. "And you're leaving this store." For a long moment, the two men stood eye to eye. Finally, Prentice stepped back, adjusting his vest. "This ain't over," he said. "Not by a long shot." He turned and stalked out, spurs jingling with each step. The ride home was silent. Even the babies seemed to sense the tension, staying quiet in their mother's arms. As sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ava finally spoke. "I should have told you," she whispered, tears threatening. "Jack, he loved the gambling halls. Said he'd win enough to make us rich." She wiped her eyes with her apron. "I found the markers after he died. I prayed they'd be forgotten." Boaz's hands were steady on the reins. "Prentice is a snake," he said, "but we'll face him together. I won't let him take Ethan." Later that night, as Ava tucked Ethan into bed, his small voice stopped her at the door. "Mama." "Yes, love?" "Why'd you pick Mr. McAllister? To marry?" Ava paused, considering her answer carefully. "Because God gave us no other way," she said finally. "We needed help, and he sent Mr. McAllister to us." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "He stood up to Mr. Prentice today," he said thoughtfully. "Yes, he did." Ava kissed his forehead and stepped into the hallway. In her own room, she knelt beside her bed, hands clasped tight. Her prayer was silent but desperate, for protection, for guidance, for the strength to hold their fragile new family together. In the face of Prentice's threats, the night wind whispered through cottonwood leaves outside her window, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Dawn painted the sky in soft pink when Ava stirred from sleep. The familiar aroma of wood smoke from the kitchen stove drifted upstairs, but something else mingled with it, the rich, salty scent of bacon. She blinked, confused. Usually she was the first one up. Wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, Ava padded down the wooden stairs. The sight that greeted her made her pause in the doorway. Boaz stood at the iron stove, his massive frame seeming too large for the kitchen as he turned. Strips of bacon in the heavy skillet. A pot of coffee bubbled nearby, and a stack of Johnny cakes waited on a plate. "Morning," he said quietly, nodding toward the table. "Thought you could use the rest." Before Ava could respond, Ethan appeared, hair tousled from sleep. He stopped, short at the sight of Boaz cooking, eyes wide with surprise. The big rancher gestured to a chair. "Sit down, son." "Breakfast is nearly ready." Ethan hesitated, glancing at his mother. Ava gave him an encouraging smile, and he slid onto the wooden bench. Boaz set a plate before him, piled with Johnny cakes and bacon. The boy stared at the food, then timidly picked up his fork. "Thank you," he mumbled, the words barely audible. They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the baby's soft cooing from their cradles. When the plates were cleared, Boaz turned to Ethan. "I'm riding out to check the north pasture today," he said. "Would you care to join me?" Ethan's fork clattered against his empty plate. He looked at his mother again, then back at Boaz. "Really? Really? That old paint Mari needs exercise, and you've shown a good hand with her." After a moment's consideration, Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, I'd like that." The morning sun cast long shadows as they rode out. Ethan perched proudly on the paint mare while Boaz's stallion picked its way along the trail beside them. Ava watched from the porch, both babies nestled in her arms, until horse and riders disappeared over the rise. In the pasture, Boaz kept their pace easy, letting Ethan grow comfortable in the saddle. The boy sat straight, trying to mirror the rancher's posture. Birds called from the scattered mesquite trees, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage. "You know, Ethan," Boaz said as they rode, "there's wisdom in the good book about raising children." He adjusted his hat against the morning sun. "Proverbs says, 'Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it.'" Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "I ain't never had much training," he admitted quietly. "Pa, he didn't stay around much for teaching. What about your letters? Can you read?" The boy shook his head, shame coloring his cheeks. "Well now," Boaz said, his voice gentle, "that's something we can fix. Would you like to learn?" Ethan's head snapped up, hope brightening his eyes. "You'd teach me?" every evening, if you're willing. We'll start with the Bible best book there is for learning letters. Back at the ranch house, Ava hung washing on the line, humming softly as she worked. The sound of her own voice startled her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt peaceful enough to sing. The clothes snapped in the breeze, and the sun warmed her face. For the first time in years, she felt truly secure. That evening, after supper was cleared away, Boaz gathered them in the sitting room. He lit the lamp on the small table and opened his Bible, its leather cover worn smooth from years of handling. Ethan sat close, neck craned to see the pages. Even the baby seemed to quiet down, as if sensing the importance of the moment. "Let's start at the beginning," Boaz said, his finger moving beneath the words. "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." His deep voice filled the room as he read, pausing occasionally to help Ethan sound out simple words. Ava sat in the rocking chair, working on mending, but her eyes kept straying to her son. The usual hardness in his young face had softened as he leaned against Boaz's arm, following along with the story of creation. When Boaz described the waters separating from the land, Ethan's eyes grew wide with wonder. "Just like when the creek floods?" he asked. "Something like that," Boaz chuckled, "but much bigger." The sound of their quiet laughter mingled with the crackle of the lamp and the gentle creaking of Ava's rocking chair. It was a small sound, barely there, but it filled the house with warmth. Like a spring thaw after a long winter, something frozen began to melt in all their hearts. A week of gentle autumn breezes brought the county fair, drawing wagons and riders from every corner of the territory. The morning air held the crisp promise of fall as Boaz hitched their team to the wagon, checking each leather strap with careful attention. Inside the ranch house, Ava wrapped both babies snugly in soft quilts. Her daughter Sarah cooed while Rose, Boaz's little one, watched with dark eyes that reminded Ava so much of her father. Ethan practically bounced with excitement as he helped pack the picnic basket, his usual brooding forgotten in the anticipation of his first fare. "Careful with those eggs," Ava cautioned, but she couldn't help smiling at his enthusiasm. The boy had changed in the past weeks, standing straighter, speaking more freely. The wagon wheels creaked as they set out, Ethan perched between his mother and Boaz on the wooden seat. Dust rose behind them on the rutted road, and meadowlarks called from fence posts as they passed. Ava noticed how Ethan leaned slightly toward Boaz, unconsciously mimicking the rancher's posture. The fairground sprawled across old Widow Jensen's south pasture, with canvas tents and wooden stalls, creating temporary streets filled with color and motion. Flags snapped in the breeze, and the scent of frying bread and roasted corn drifted on the air. They secured the wagon and made their way through the crowd, Ava carrying Sarah while Boaz held Rose close to his chest. "Look at them pies," Ethan exclaimed, pressing his nose against a display table where golden crusts steamed in the morning sun. Down the row, quilts hung like stained glass windows, their patterns telling stories of patience and craft. In the livestock pens, sheep bleated and cattle lowed, while proud farmers discussed bloodlines and feed. Near midday, Boaz paused by a posting board, reading an announcement. "There's a junior riding contest," he said, glancing at Ethan. "For boys under 10. What do you say, son?" Ethan's eyes went wide. But I ain't never. You've been practicing every day this week," Boaz reminded him. "That paint Mari knows you now, and you know her." After a moment's hesitation, Ethan squared his shoulders. "I'll try." The contest drew a dozen young riders, most from established ranching families. Ava's heart hammered as Ethan mounted the paint Mar, looking so small against the afternoon sky. Boaz helped adjust his stirrups one last time, speaking low words of encouragement that brought a determined nod from the boy. One by one, the children demonstrated their skills, walking, trotting, and finally cantering in a figure-8 pattern. When Ethan's turn came, the Mari responded to his light touch as if they'd been partners for years. His back straight, reins held just as Boaz had taught him. Ethan guided her through the pattern without a single misstep that the judge's conference seemed to last forever. Finally, they approached the lined-up riders, ribbons in hand. Third place went to the banker's son, second to a ranch hand's daughter. Then the head judge stepped forward with the blue ribbon. First place, he announced, goes to Ethan Mayfield. The crowd erupted in cheers. Ethan's face split in a grin so wide, it seemed to shine brighter than the autumn sun. As Boaz stepped forward to help him dismount, the boy threw his arms around the big rancher's neck. "Did you see?" he shouted. "Did you see me, Pa?" The word hung in the air like a prayer answered. Boaz's arms tightened around the boy, and Ava pressed her free hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Around them, the applause grew louder, but for that moment, their small family existed in a bubble of joy, all their own as evening painted the sky in purple and gold. They sat together on a rough wooden bench, sharing paper-wrapped portions of fried bread drizzled with honey. Cider warmed their hands in tin cups while fiddle music floated from a nearby platform where couples danced. The babies slept contentedly in their arms, full and peaceful. Ethan wore his blue ribbon proudly pinned to his shirt, occasionally touching it as if to make sure it was real. His legs swung beneath the bench, sticky fingers clutching the last bite of bread as he watched the dancers with heavy-lidded eyes. The drive home was quiet, their wagon one of many threading through the darkness by lantern light. Stars winked overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Ethan dozed against Boaz's shoulder, the ribbon still catching glints of lamplight. When they reached the ranch house, Ava touched Boaz's arm as he lifted the sleeping boy. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving him this day. For giving him his pride back." Boaz nodded, understanding in his eyes. Together, they carried their children inside, the house welcoming them with familiar creaks and shadows. For the first time since their hasty marriage, they felt truly like a family, bound by something stronger than mere necessity. 2 evenings after the fair, dust clouds rose on the horizon as wagons rolled into town. Word spread quickly about a traveling preacher setting up for revival meetings in the town square. Lanterns hung from posts cast dancing shadows across weathered faces as townsfolk gathered, drawn by the promise of fiery sermons and spirited hymns. Ava sat in their wagon beside Boaz, her heart light despite the evening chill. Rose slept peacefully in her arms, bundled against the cooling air. Sarah dozed beside her sister, both babies full and content after nursing. Ethan perched on the edge of the seat, his blue ribbon still proudly pinned to his Sunday shirt. "Reckon we ought to hear what this preacher has to say," Boaz had suggested earlier, his deep voice thoughtful. "Been a while since we had proper preaching in town." The square filled quickly as the sun set. Folks arranged themselves on rough wooden benches or stood in clusters, greeting neighbors with quiet nods. The traveling preacher, who introduced himself as Silas Ward, cut an imposing figure despite his wiry frame. His eyes gleamed sharp in the lamplight as he surveyed the crowd, Bible clutched tight in his pale hands. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice carrying across the square, "we gather tonight to speak of God's pure design for his people." The sermon started gently enough, with familiar passages about love and redemption. But as the night deepened, Preacher Ward's tone grew harder, his words cutting like winter wind. "The Lord commands us to keep ourselves undefiled," he declared, pacing before the crowd. "Those who mix with heathens bring corruption into their bloodline. Such unions birth children of darkness, bearing the mark of ungodly ways." Ava's arms tightened around Rose, her throat constricting. The baby stirred, dark eyes blinking open to gaze at her adopted mother. Around them, townsfolk began to whisper, heads turning toward their wagon. Ava felt their stares like physical weight upon her shoulders. "These half-breed children," Ward continued, his voice rising, carry the taint of their savage heritage. They must not be suffered to corrupt good Christian families. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone coughed. A woman 2 benches ahead shifted away, pulling her own children closer. Ava trembled, tears threatening to spill as she pressed. Rose closer to her heart. Beside her, Boaz rose slowly to his full height. The lamplight caught his strong features as he stepped forward, drawing every eye. His voice, when it came, carried the steady strength of mountain stone. "My daughter," he said clearly, "is a gift from God Almighty. He formed her in her mother's womb, perfect and pure as any child ever born. The Lord does not make mistakes." Silence fell across the square. Preacher Ward's face flushed red in the flickering light. But before he could speak, Boaz continued, "My late wife was a woman of faith, who taught me more about God's love than any sermon. Our daughter carries that legacy of grace." The quiet held for a long moment. Then old Mrs. Peterson, who had helped birth half the town's children, nodded firmly. "Amen to that," she declared, her quavering voice breaking the spell. Boaz helped Ava and the children into the wagon, his movements gentle but swift. As they drove home under starlight, Ava noticed how tightly he gripped the reins, how carefully he controlled his breathing. Later that night, after the children were settled, Ava stood at the kitchen window. Moonlight silvered the yard where Rose's mother had once tended herbs and flowers. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as she thought of the hatred in the preacher's words, the judgment in the townspeople's eyes. How can they look at such an innocent child and see darkness? She whispered as Boaz's steady footsteps approached. "She's pure light, pure love." Boaz's large hand came to rest on her shoulder. "They fear what they don't understand," he said softly. "But I swear to you, Ava, I'll protect our family, no matter what comes." She turned to face him, seeing the worry that shadowed his eyes despite his brave words. "I'm scared for her," Ava admitted, "for the life she face, the scorn she bear." From the doorway came a small, determined voice. "Nobody's gonna hurt my sister." They turned to find Ethan standing there in his nightshirt, his young face set with fierce resolve. "I won't let them," he declared. "She's my family now, and I'll protect her too." Ava opened her arms, and Ethan ran to them. Boaz gathered them all close, his strength surrounding them like a fortress wall. Together they stood in the moonlit kitchen, a family bound not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the courage to stand against a world that would try to tear them apart. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Ava worked the butter churn, her arms aching with the familiar rhythm. The wooden dasher made steady thumping sounds against the cream, matching the beat of her anxious heart. Last night's revival meeting still weighed heavy on her mind. Sarah and Rose lay nearby, on a blanket spread across the plank floor, cooing at each other as sunshine warmed their faces. Ava paused her churning to smile at them, marveling at how the 2 babies had bonded like true sisters. The sight eased some of her worry about the previous evening's harsh words. Through the open window, she could hear the steady ring of Boaz's hammer as he mended broken fence posts in the north pasture. Ethan had begged to help, but Boaz had insisted he finish his reading lesson first. The boy now sat at the kitchen table, lips moving silently as he traced letters in the Bible. The clip-clop of approaching hooves drew Ava's attention. A rider in a dusty black coat reined his horse to a stop in the yard. Her heart quickened as she recognized him as one of Jed Prentice's men. "Mrs. McAllister," he called out, touching the brim of his hat. "Got papers here, needs delivering." Ava wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch. The man extended a thick envelope sealed with wax. Her fingers trembled as she took it. "Good day to you, ma'am," he said, wheeling his horse around and trotting away. The paper felt heavy in her hands. Breaking the seal, she pulled out several official-looking documents. The words "Court Summons" stood bold across the top page. The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet as she read Prentice's claims about her late husband's gambling debts and his demand for compensation through Ethan's indentured service. Ava sank into a kitchen chair, her legs too weak to hold her. The papers scattered across the table, startling Ethan from his studies. "Ma?" he asked, worry creasing his young brow. "What's wrong?" "Nothing for you to fret over," she managed, though her voice shook. "Run fetch Boaz for me, please." As Ethan's boots thudded across the porch, guilt crashed over her like a wave. She should have spoken up sooner, should have trusted Boaz with the truth she'd been carrying. Now her silence might cost them everything. Boaz's heavy footsteps approached, and she heard him telling Ethan to watch the babies. When he entered, his face was etched with concern. "Prentice's man brought court papers," she whispered, gesturing at the scattered documents. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she continued. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have said before." Boaz pulled up a chair beside her, his presence steady and strong. "Tell me now," he said, gently. "After Thomas died, while I was going through his things, I found some papers." Her voice quavered. "Records showing he'd paid those gambling debts to Prentice. But I was so afraid Prentice would find some other way to take what little we had left. I hid them away and tried to forget." Instead of anger or disappointment, understanding filled Boaz's eyes. "Where did you put them?" he asked. "In Thomas's old trunk." "I haven't looked at them since that day." "Then we'll look now," Boaz said firmly, rising to his feet. Together, they climbed to the attic, where dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight. Ava pointed to a battered trunk in the corner. Boaz lifted the heavy lid, and she began carefully sorting through the contents. Thomas's old clothes, letters, a few books dot near the bottom. Her fingers found a cracked leather pouch. Her hands shook as she drew it out and loosened the ties. Inside were several folded papers, yellow with age but still legible. Ava's tears fell faster as she read the familiar words receipts for payment, signed by Prentice himself. "These could save us," she breathed. "Save Ethan." Looking up at Boaz through her tears, she added, "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Boaz's large hand cupped her cheek, his thumb gently brushing away her tears. Then he bent and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, the first truly tender moment they had shared as husband and wife. Ava's heart fluttered at the gentle touch. "No more apologies," he said quietly. "What matters is that we have them now. We'll face this together, Ava, whatever comes." She leaned into his strength, feeling truly safe for the first time since receiving the summons. The afternoon light slanted golden through the attic window, warming them both as they held each other. The precious documents clutched between them like a shield against the storms. A head-thunder rumbled in the distance as dawn broke. Over the ranch, dark clouds threatening on the horizon. Ava stood at the window, watching Boaz hitch the horses to the wagon, his movements deliberate despite the coming storm. Her stomach churned with worry as she gathered supplies for the journey to town. "Best wrap them extras warm," Boaz called from the yard, eyeing the angry sky. "That rain's fixing to pour soon enough." Ava bundled both babies in thick blankets, tucking them close against her chest. Sarah and Rose snuggled together, oblivious to the tension in the air. Ethan appeared beside her, already wearing his oilskin coat, his face solemn. "Time to go," Boaz said from the doorway, water already beating on his broad shoulders. They climbed into the wagon just as the first heavy drops began to fall. Ethan pressed close to Boaz on the seat, while Ava huddled in back with the infants. The leather pouch containing Thomas's receipts was secured inside her dress, close to her heart. The rain grew fiercer as they traveled, drumming against the wagon canvas. Lightning split the sky, making the horses nervous. Boaz handled the reins with steady hands, speaking low to calm them. Through the curtain of rain, Ava could see Ethan watching him, learning from his quiet strength. Almost there, Boaz called over his shoulder as the courthouse came into view. A crowd had gathered despite the downpour, their faces hard as they watched the wagon approach. Whispers rippled through them as Boaz helped Ava down, shielding her. And the babies with his broad frame. Ethan stuck close to his mother's skirts, eyes darting nervously at the hostile faces. Inside the courthouse, their wet boots squeaked against the wooden floor. Jed Prentice stood near the judge's bench, a satisfied smirk playing across his weathered face. His confidence made Ava's heart sink, but she straightened her spine, remembering the documents pressed against her chest. Court is now in session. The judge announced, his gavel crack echoing through the packed room. Mr. Prentice, you may present your case. Prentice stepped forward, his voice oily smooth. Your Honor, the matter is simple. Thomas Mayfield borrowed heavily from me before his death. His widow has failed to settle these debts. He gestured toward Ethan. The boy will serve as payment through bonded labor, as is my right by law. Ava felt Ethan trembling beside her. Boaz's hand found her shoulder, steadying them both. McAllister, the judge turned to Boaz. You've taken responsibility for the Mayfield family. What say you to these claims? Boaz rose to his full height, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. Your Honor, we have evidence that may prove these debts were settled. We request time to present our documentation properly. The judge considered this, stroking his gray beard. Prentice's face darkened with barely contained rage. I'll grant 1 day's delay, the judge declared finally. Return tomorrow morning with your evidence. Court dismissed. The crowd filed out into the rain, which had settled into a steady drizzle. As they loaded the wagon, Ava caught fragments of threatening talk from Prentice's men, huddled near the hitching post. Take the boy tonight if we have to. Teach them to cross the boss. Ethan heard too, pressing closer to Boaz as they climbed aboard. The journey home was silent, each lost in their own worried thoughts. Night had fallen by the time they reached the ranch. After settling the horses, they gathered in the warm kitchen. Ava served a simple supper of beans and cornbread, though nobody had much appetite. I'm so sorry, Ava whispered once Ethan had gone upstairs. If I hadn't been so afraid to show those papers sooner. No, Boaz cut her off gently. Fear's natural when you're protecting your young, but you ain't alone anymore. He took her hand, his calloused thumb tracing her knuckles. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it as family. Later, after Boaz had checked the doors and windows, Ava knelt beside the children's beds. Sarah and Rose slept peacefully in their shared cradle, while Ethan tossed restlessly in his sleep. Moonlight filtered through the window, casting soft shadows across their faces. Lord, she prayed softly, tears sliding down her cheeks, protect my children. Give us strength for whatever comes. Show us your mercy. Her fingers brushed Ethan's tousled hair. Please don't let them take my boy. Outside, rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called into the night. Ava remained on her knees, praying in the darkness, until exhaustion finally drew her to bed. Tomorrow would bring either deliverance or heartbreak, and only God knew which. First rays of dawn painted the sky in pale gold when Boaz mounted his horse. Ava stood in the doorway, watching him adjust his hat against the morning sun. The storm had passed, leaving behind mud and scattered branches across the yard. I'll return by midday, Boaz said, his deep voice gentle in the quiet morning. Yellow. Hawk's camp ain't far. Ava nodded, clutching her shawl against the cool air. God be with you, she whispered. Boaz guided his horse through the gate, following an old trail that wound through scrub oak and cedar. His late wife had often spoken of Yellow Hawk's wisdom, how the elder had blessed their marriage despite others' disapproval. Now, Boaz prayed the old man's words might save another family from being torn apart. The sun climbed higher as Boaz approached the Comanche camp. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children paused in their play to watch him pass. Yellow Hawk. sat outside his lodge as if expecting the visit. His weathered face showed no surprise as Boaz dismounted and approached with proper respect. "My friend," Yellow Hawk greeted him in English, gesturing to a seat beside him. "I have heard whispers of your troubles." Boaz settled onto a woven mat, accepting a cup of coffee. "I need your help, Elder. You remember Thomas Mayfield?" Yellow Hawk's eyes grew distant with memory. "Yes, the man who died owing money to the cattle baron." He sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "I saw him pay his debt many seasons ago near the trading post." Hope surged in Boaz's chest. "Would you tell this to the white man's court?" "Your word, added to the papers we found." "I will speak," Yellow Hawk interrupted, raising one hand. "For the sake of your new wife's son, and for the memory of my kinswoman who loved you." His dark eyes met Boaz's. "But you must know, many will not want to hear truth from Comanche lips." "Your word carries weight with honest men," Boaz said firmly. "That's all we need." Back at the ranch house, Ava kept her hands busy with preparations. She mixed cornmeal and shaped it into bread, wrapped dried beef and apples for their noon meal, and laid out their best clothes for court. Each task was a prayer, an offering of hope. The babies napped together in their cradle while Ethan sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, Boaz's boots in his lap. His small hands worked the polish in careful circles, just as Boaz had shown him. "Want them to shine proper," Ethan muttered, focused on his task. "So Pa looks right smart in court." Ava's heart caught at hearing him say "Pa" so naturally now. She watched her son's dedication to this simple act of service, seeing love grow where there had been only hurt before. When Boaz returned, dust-covered but satisfied, he found them all working together in the kitchen. The sight stopped him in. The doorway, Ava at the stove, Ethan setting the table, even the babies quiet in their corner. His new family, bound together by something stronger than blood. "Yellow Hawk will come," he announced, washing up at the pump. He saw Thomas Pay, Prentice years ago. His testimony, plus those papers. He left the hope unspoken. Ava served their supper, fresh cornbread, beans with salt pork, and the last of their preserved peaches. They ate slowly, savoring this moment of peace before tomorrow's trial. The lamp cast warm shadows on the walls, making the kitchen feel like a sanctuary. When the plates were empty, Boaz did something he'd never done before. He reached for Ava's hand, then Ethan's, bowing his head in the lamplight. "Lord," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "give us courage tomorrow." He paused, squeezing their joined hands. "Watch over this family you've given me. Help us stand strong together, whatever comes. Amen." "Amen," Ethan whispered, holding tight to Boaz's calloused fingers. Ava felt tears prick her eyes at the simple prayer. This was what she'd longed for, not just shelter or security, but true family. Looking across the table at Boaz's bowed head and Ethan's trusting face, she saw God's hand in their unlikely union. The lamp burned low as they cleared the table together, working in comfortable silence. Outside, crickets sang in the cooling evening air, and somewhere an owl called softly. Their home felt different tonight, more solid, more certain, as if their bonds had been strengthened by Boaz's humble prayer and Yellow Hawk's promised support. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight they were simply family, gathered in lamplight, bound by love and trust and shared purpose. God had brought them this far. He would see them through. Dawn broke, cold and clear over the ranch as Ava wrapped both infants in thick blankets. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her best shawl. The documents lay secure in Boaz's leather satchel, their hope bound in faded ink and paper. "Ready?" Boaz asked softly, appearing in the doorway. He wore his good coat, boots gleaming. From Ethan's careful polish. Ava nodded, gathering the baby's clothes. Ethan stood straight back beside her, trying to look brave though his fingers twisted in his shirt hem. Together they climbed into the wagon, the morning sun casting long shadows across the yard. The town stirred with unusual activity as they arrived. Folks lined the boardwalk, whispering behind raised hands. Ava kept her eyes forward, chin lifted, as Boaz helped her down from the wagon. Inside the courthouse, the wooden benches creaked with spectators. Jed Prentice sat near the front, his expensive coat marking him apart from the crowd. His smile curved like a snake's when he saw them enter. Two of his men flanked him, their eyes hard as gunmetal. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Harrison entered, his black robes sweeping the floor. The proceedings began with Prentice presenting his case. He rose smoothly, producing a stack of papers with flourish. "Your Honor, I have here documentation of Thomas Mayfield's outstanding debts." His voice dripped with false sympathy. The boy must work to settle what his father owed. The judge examined the papers while Ava held her breath. Beside her, Ethan pressed closer to Boaz's side. "And now," Judge Harrison said, "the defense may present their evidence." Boaz stood, his height commanding attention. Without ceremony, he removed Thomas's original repayment records from his satchel. "Your Honor, these documents show the debt was paid in full 3 years ago." The judge studied both sets of papers carefully, holding them to the light. His eyebrows rose as he compared the signatures and dates. "These originals appear authentic," he declared. The ink aging and paper quality matched the period in question. Prentice's face darkened. Before he could object, Boaz continued, "We have a witness who saw the payment made, Your Honor." The courtroom hushed as Yellow Hawk rose from his place near the back. His dignified bearing drew all eyes as he walked forward, his moccasins silent on the wooden floor. "I saw Thomas Mayfield pay his debt," Yellow Hawk stated clearly, his English precise and measured. "At the trading post, 3 summers passed. Mr. Prentice took the money himself, counting silver dollars into his own hands." Prentice leaped to his feet. "This is outrageous," he shouted, face flushing red. "You can't accept testimony from a—" "Mind yourself, Mr. Prentice," Judge Harrison cut in sharply. "This court recognizes truth, regardless of who speaks it." His stern gaze swept the room. "The law sees no color when it comes to honest testimony." Prentice subsided, but hatred blazed in his eyes. The judge gathered the papers, adjusting his spectacles. "I will review all evidence presented and deliver my final judgment tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned." As people filed out, Prentice shouldered past Boaz, his men close behind. "This ain't over," he snarled. "That boy belongs to me by rights." "The boy belongs with his family," Boaz replied evenly, one hand on Ethan's shoulder. Outside, hostile murmurs followed them down the street. Someone spat in their path. Boaz guided them quickly to the wagon, his broad shoulders shielding Ava and the children from angry stares. Yellow Hawk approached before they left, touching his closed fist to his heart in farewell. "Stand strong," he said quietly. "Truth has been spoken. Let it do its work." The ride home seemed longer than usual, tension riding with them like an unwelcome passenger. Ava held the babies close, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Ethan sat between her and Boaz, unusually quiet. At the ranch, they went through their evening routine, feeding livestock, preparing supper, settling the babies. But an electric undercurrent charged the air, making every movement feel significant. As Ava stirred the stew pot, she caught Boaz watching her from the doorway. His expression was gentle despite the day's strain. "You did well today," he said softly. "We all did," she replied, meaning it. Her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks, despite the uncertainty still ahead. They had spoken truth in the face of power. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The lamplight cast warm shadows across the kitchen as they gathered for their evening meal. Outside, a whip-poor will called in the gathering dusk. its song a reminder that life continued its rhythm despite human struggles. Inside, their small family drew closer, finding strength and unity as they waited for tomorrow's judgment. The night crept by with agonizing slowness. Ava tossed in her bed, listening to every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind through the eaves. Even the babies seemed restless, stirring more than usual in their cradles. Dawn's first gray light filtered through the curtains. When heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway, Boaz's voice boomed, urgent and tight with worry. "Ava!" "Ethan's not in his room." She bolted upright, heart pounding. Together they searched the house, calling Ethan's name. The barn stood empty, tools untouched. No sign of him in the chicken coop or behind the woodpile. Terror clawed at Ava's throat as Boaz examined the ground near Ethan's window. "Tracks," he said grimly, pointing to multiple boot prints in the soft earth. 3 men, they carried him. His jaw clenched as he traced the trail leading toward the road. Ava clutched both infants to her chest, trembling. "Prentice," she whispered. "He took my boy." Boaz straightened, his face hard as granite. "I'll find him." He strode to the barn, emerging moments later atop his fastest horse. "Ride to town, Ava. Get the sheriff." Without another word, he spurred. His mount, following the tracks at a gallop. Ava's hands shook as she secured both babies in their slings. Her Mari seemed to sense her urgency, standing steady as she mounted. The road into town stretched endless before her, each hoofbeat matching her silent prayers. Sheriff Mills was just opening his office when she rode up, tears streaming down her face. "Prentice's men took Ethan," she gasped. "Boaz is tracking them alone." The sheriff's face darkened. He shouted for his deputies, and within minutes, 3 lawmen thundered out of town, leaving Ava to pace the boardwalk with her sleeping infants. Miles away, Boaz followed the trail toward the river. The tracks grew fresher as morning stretched. Toward noon, at last he heard voices carrying across the water. Dismounting quietly, he crept through the brush until he spotted them. 3 of Prentice's hired guns lounging near the riverbank, rifles close at hand. Ethan sat tied to a tree, his face tree-streaked but defiant. Boaz stepped into the clearing, empty hands raised. "Let the boy go." The men jumped up, weapons rising. "McAllister," the leader sneered. "Mr. Prentice said you might show up. Said to tell you the boy's payment for them forged papers you brought to court. Those papers spoke truth," Boaz said evenly. "You know it. Let him go, and we'll forget this happened." "Or what?" Another man laughed harshly. "You're outnumbered. And unarmed." "Pa!" Ethan called out, struggling against his bonds. Boaz took another step forward, his voice steady. "I won't leave without my son." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Rifle hammers clicked back. Boaz stood motionless, praying his gamble would pay off. Just then, hoofbeats thundered through the trees. The sheriff and his deputies burst into the clearing, guns drawn. "Drop those weapons." Sheriff Mills barked, "You're all under arrest for kidnapping." Prentice's men hesitated, then slowly lowered their rifles. While deputies secured the kidnappers, Boaz rushed to untie Ethan. The boy threw himself into his arms, sobbing. "I knew you'd come, Pa," he choked out. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." Boaz held him tight, his own eyes wet. "Never, son, never." The ride home seemed to take forever, Ethan secure in front of Boaz on the saddle. They found Ava waiting in the yard, both babies asleep in their cradle on the porch. She ran to them, gathering Ethan in her arms with a cry of relief. That evening, after supper had been cleared and the babies nursed, Ava sat in her rocking chair, with Ethan on her lap, though he was almost too big for it now. She stroked his hair, whispering fiercely, "I'm so sorry, my brave boy. I let fear keep me quiet too long. Never again. From now on, we speak truth and trust God to protect us." Ethan nodded against her shoulder, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Near the hearth, Boaz knelt in prayer, his deep voice carrying words of gratitude. Ethan watched him with wonder, seeing not just the giant rancher who had married his mother, but a true father who had risked everything to save him. The firelight painted long shadows on the walls as their small family huddled close, each one grateful for the bonds that had grown stronger through trial. Outside, crickets sang their evening chorus, a peaceful counterpoint to the day's drama. Inside, love and faith had proved stronger than fear and greed. Morning sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows as townsfolk filed in for the final hearing. Ava sat straight-backed beside Boaz, both babies sleeping peacefully in their arms. Ethan perched between them, his face set with determination beyond his years. Judge Harrison entered, his black robes sweeping as he took his seat. The room fell silent. Prentice slouched at the defendant's table, his arrogance diminished by the failed kidnapping attempt. Having reviewed all evidence, the judge began, his voice carrying to every corner, including the original repayment documents presented by Mrs. McAllister and the sworn testimony of Elder Yellow Hawk. I find Mr. Prentice's claim of debt wholly without merit. Ava's hand found Boaz's, squeezing tight. The judge continued, his tone growing stern. Furthermore, the attempted abduction of the minor child Ethan Mayfield shows a grievous disregard for law and human dignity. Mr. Prentice, you are hereby fined $500 to be paid immediately to the court. Prentice shot to his feet, face mottled red. You can't. Silence. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like thunder. One more word, sir, and you will face imprisonment. This court declares all claimed debts null and void. The boy remains with his mother and stepfather, where he legally belongs. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Prentice slumped, his reputation crumbling before their eyes. His hired men shuffled their feet, avoiding their employer's gaze. Elder Yellow Hawk rose slowly from his seat, his dignified presence commanding attention. He approached Boaz and Ava, placing weathered hands over the sleeping infant girl. May the Great Spirit watch over this child, he spoke in clear English, his voice carrying. She bridges two peoples, bringing honor to both. His blessing rang with such authority that even the most prejudiced onlookers fell silent. Tears streamed down Ava's cheeks as she looked up at Boaz. In that moment, she saw not just the man who had saved her family from starvation, but her true partner, chosen by God's own hand. Their marriage, born of desperate necessity, had grown into something far deeper, a covenant of love, trust, and shared purpose. The ride home felt lighter than any journey before. Neighbors who had once turned away now lifted their hats in greeting. Children waved from fence posts. Even the evening air seemed sweeter as they approached their ranch. That night, Ava set out their best dishes for supper. The table fairly groaned with celebration food: fresh bread, roast chicken, and sweet potato pie. Lamplight danced across their faces as Ethan, unable to contain his excitement, recounted his rescue for the third time. And then Pa just walked right out there, facing down 3 guns. He exclaimed, gesturing with his fork. He wasn't scared at all. Oh, I was plenty scared, Boaz corrected gently, bouncing his daughter on his knee. But sometimes being brave means doing what's right, even when you're afraid. Ava watched her family, heart full to bursting. Laughter echoed through the kitchen, Ethan's high and clear, Boaz's deep chuckle, even the baby's happy gurgles joining in. Here was the blessing she had never dared to pray for, not just survival, but true joy. Winter descended on the high plains like a soft white blanket, transforming the rugged landscape into something magical. Snow piled in gentle drifts against the McAllister ranch house, the wooden walls creaking softly in the cold. Through frosted window panes, warm lamplight spilled out into the gathering dusk, a beacon of comfort against the deepening night. Inside, the main room glowed with warmth from the crackling hearth. Ava sat in her rocking chair, both infants nestled close. Little Sarah, Boaz's daughter, dozed contentedly after nursing, her dark lashes fluttering against rosy cheeks. Grace, Ava's own baby, suckled quietly, tiny fingers curled around her mother's. Thumb. The steady motion of the rocker kept time with the ticking of the mantel clock. Near the fireplace, Ethan sat cross-legged on the bearskin rug, carefully sounding out words from the family Bible spread across his lap. His finger traced each line deliberately, voice growing more confident with each verse. Boaz's large hand rested on the boy's shoulder, pride evident in his gentle smile as Ethan worked through the difficult passages. "Well done, son," Boaz murmured when Ethan successfully navigated a particularly challenging word. The boy beamed at the praise. Sitting straighter, the aroma of beef stew filled the room, mingling with the scent of fresh-baked bread. On the heavy oak table, Ava had laid out their evening meal, the stew pot steaming in the center, surrounded by warm bread, fresh butter, and preserved peaches from last summer's harvest. The sight brought color to their cheeks, a far cry from the desperate times they had known. When all were seated, Boaz bowed his head, his deep voice carrying clear and strong through the quiet room. "Lord, we thank you for your mercy and deliverance, for bringing us together as family, for filling our table with plenty and our hearts with love, for giving us shelter from the storm, both outside these walls and within our souls. Amen. Amen." The others echoed softly. Later, after the children were tucked into their beds upstairs, Ava and Boaz sat together on the settle near the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as they watched snow falling outside the window, each lost in peaceful thoughts. "You gave my boy a father, Boaz," Ava whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached for his hand, remembering how close they had come to losing everything. Boaz's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "And you gave me back my faith," he answered softly, his eyes reflecting firelight. "When Sarah's mother died, I thought God had abandoned me, but he led me to you, to all of you." The snow continued falling outside, but within the ranch house, hearts once broken had found healing. The family that necessity had brought together now stood bound by something far stronger: love, trust, and faith restored. As Ava leaned against Boaz's shoulder, she offered a silent prayer of gratitude. God had indeed delivered them, not just from hunger and hardship, but into the fullness of joy. If today's story echoed in your heart, I hope you'll stick around. Subscribe, and I'll be here again tomorrow with another story that speaks softly but stays deeply.